My name's Simon Tanner, and welcome to this session. Thank you to you for coming and braving the early Saturday morning start. Were any of you at the karaoke thing last night? You get extra props for being here. Well done. And so this session is just a tiny bit different from in the pamphlet, in that it had Jerry Ottevanger from the Imperial War Museum, myself, and this guy, Michael Edson, on the program. But Jerry Ottevanger is in the process of finishing his PhD. In fact, he's probably going to be submitting it now. I'll stand still for you to do that. Anyway, and so he wasn't able in the end to come. So we've switched things around a little bit in terms of how we're going to address this session. And because I wanted to particularly bring the new results of some work on impact models, we've decided that what we would do is I'll talk about the issues around value and impact in this with regard to digital resources, and then Neil Simler, who stood in at the last minute and is a hero, and Michael Edson are going to respond, ask questions, be interlocutors, challenge, get you guys involved along the way as well as we go. So I hope that sounds fine. If anyone decides now's the moment they want to get up and leave, I will not be.
Because we're locking the doors.
Yeah. I'll lock that door tight. Okay, so what am I going to chat to you about this morning? Kind of a number of things. So today's agenda really is I'm going to engage with the issue of value from a number of different perspectives. I'm going to come at it talking a little bit about it in respect of cultural value and individuals and people's own sense of value in this space in terms of some of the research that we've done. I'm going to look at it from the perspective of the value and benefits of digitized resources in relationship to research that we've previously looked at in terms of where are the values in those areas. And I'm going to introduce the balanced value impact model in terms of thinking about how do we move towards an evidence-based impact agenda, engaging with this key thing of what's changed for people, what's changed in people's lives or life opportunities because of what we've done, as opposed to a marketing dissemination conception of impact. And I'm going to top and tail this whole session with a couple of videos from the Midnight Run, which is something that I've been engaging with as a way of thinking about cultural value. And this first video is from the first Midnight Run that we did. The Midnight Run is kind of like a 12-hour flash mob where we get people together. I'm working with a street poet who's been running the Midnight Runs for a number of years now, Ino Ellens, and with a arts organisation, Enteleki Arts. And Ino just puts out the call and says, do you want to come join in? Come join in. Find me at 6 o'clock in the evening, and then we'll just travel through London for 12 hours, experiencing London until 6 a.m. as a group. And what he and I did, and David Slater at Enteleki did, was we worked in a series of social experiments along the way to enable us to engage with that. So the Midnight Run, I want to show you this video made by one of the artists who came on the Midnight Run. He used an old reclaimed camera, because one of the issues of the Midnight Run is to reclaim London, is to reclaim a space. We kind of reclaimed the university by going into the university at midnight and writing on the walls and stuff like this, you know. And he reclaimed an old SLR camera and shot this footage as video footage, but as you know, very high speed stills, and then took the film back the next day and processed it in his kitchen and dried the film in his garden. You know. So I'll just show you this. So the midnight run, because we can't see the stars for fumes, we turn to smashed glass, believing shards shine like constellations do. So this is kind of my bit where I say, come do the digital humanities because we do cool stuff. You know, the department that I'm from is the Department of Digital Humanities at King's College London, and we engage with the application of technology in the arts and humanities and social sciences, and doing interesting new insights into humanities research through the use of technologies. But we also do deep engagements with partner organisations such as libraries, museums, archives, particularly myself. I have two hats. I'm the Deputy Head of Department. I'm also the Director of Digital Consultancy, so I spend my time teaching and administering within the department and doing research, but I also spend time as a consultant out in the field with helping museums, libraries and archives with strategy around digital things. We're the highest rated digital humanities research unit in the UK and one of the biggest in the world. And we have 3 master's programs, one in digital asset management, which I know is a key thing that we've been talking about over the last few days, one in digital humanities and one in digital culture and society. And we're in the process of building an undergraduate program called digital culture. So that's us. And what I wanted to do was sort of show you the sort of segue between the ideas that are rolling around in that sort of I'm just going to put this away because it's making noises. The sort of, it's because you're tweeting stuff about me. It's beeping at me to go, look, you're being spoken about. Between those sort of very human values of individual people and sort of values that we are often, in a way, almost imposing upon our audiences of saying, look, this is what we think is valuable about these areas. And I wanted to answer this question first up, which is, are we making an impact or just a splash in this sphere? And this is based on research that I did for one of the major funding organisations in the UK called JISC. JISC has spent somewhere in the region of 28 to 30 million pounds over the last 8 to 10 years, no, probably about 12 years actually, on various digitisation programmes. So when you hear about the 3 million pages of newspaper coming out of the British Library, you know, that's a JISC project. When you hear some of those exciting museum projects out of the V&A, some of those are funded by JISC. When you hear about activities in terms of British Film Institute or some of the BBC stuff, some of that has JISC funding in there. And they asked me to look at the value and benefits of digitised resources, and I came at this from the perspective of learning, teaching, research and enjoyment. And I always like to put enjoyment into the mix here, and because I always think that when we're interested in public repositories that we're talking about education, enlightenment, and entertainment, and that these three E's are paramount in that activity. And so we looked at this, and I'll skim through it, so I won't spend a huge amount of time on this. But it's worth just stating that there are a number of benefits, and this URL will be up for a while, so you'll be able to pick it up as it goes. And I will chuck this on SlideShare, but what I'll do for the videos, I'll just link those to the Vimeo sites where the videos are, rather than obviously trying to embed those in the SlideShare, because that's just beyond my technical ability to even consider how to do that. So new areas of research enabled. So one of the projects that is an exemplar of this is the Old Bailey Online, which is a history project relating to the court transcripts of the Old Bailey. And this has actually changed the way that historians are working in relationship to historical content. It's reinforcing the workings of a civil society. It's reconfiguring our analysis in favour of the individual by being able to tell the stories of ordinary people rather than the story of history from the elite's perspectives. It's reconfiguring the way some historians are engaging with their historical perspectives. But it's also enabling, as David Turner here says, abilities to ask questions that couldn't previously be easily asked. So he states that it's about discovering the hidden lives of disabled people who have traditionally not left records of their lives, but they found that disability was discussed by many writers in the 18th century. And the disabled men and women played an important role in social life at the time. And in some respects, you know, attitudes to disabled people were a bit more refreshing than our attitudes these days are in some respects, because it was so prevalent as an issue for people. So, you know, being able to ask questions that maybe you weren't able to ask before is always often put forward as one of the benefits of having content available digitally. Being able to be effective and efficient. The opportunity to do things comprehensively. The opportunity to be able to say, I can now look at, it is now feasible for me to look at an image of all of Picasso's works that are publicly available, like this. As opposed to, I'm now going to travel around the 15 museums in the world, galleries in the world that have Picasso paintings and drawings, and then I still won't have seen everything like this. So the opportunity to say that you've seen almost everything, possibly everything in some respects, you know, but that opportunity of being comprehensive. The opportunity to widen access to materials such as the Jane Austen fiction manuscripts, which, as Catherine Sutherland said, you know, offers an unprecedented opportunity for new scholarship. Exploring the creative laboratory of her novels, you can see, she didn't get it right first time, lots of crossings out. And making the manuscript sources freely available to a wider public. So this issue of free and wide access. And particularly these materials were spread over a number of libraries and would have been very difficult for an ordinary member of the public to get access to, let alone for teachers, school groups, all of those sorts of groups to access. So lots of benefit there. The downside for Catherine Sutherland is she's getting hate mail from people saying, how dare you show that Jane Austen didn't have perfect grammar, and that she spelt things wrong, and sometimes she didn't write it exactly as it was printed in the book, and the suggestion that maybe her editors had some part in her creative process. Surely she just was perfect. You know, this is the level of sort of godhood that certain authors are held in. And in a sense, it's quite important to be able to show people this creative process, because it actually helps you understand quite how special it is. That it isn't just a magical thing. It is magic and work, you know, and collaboration as well. A lot of people don't really understand that creativity and art is a collaborative thing, you know, but it doesn't. People don't do this on their own. all the time, as well. So there's some really interesting learning activities there. And there's bringing collections out of the dark. We all literally understand this, the idea that most of our museum collections aren't being seen by people because they're sat in storage. This is literally a piece of medieval music that came out of the dark. This one's out of the closet, as it were, because this was lining a hat box. When it was discovered, and so the opportunity to enable people to see things that they couldn't ever possibly see because of our opportunities for exhibition spaces, and it's about economic and community benefits. There are some hardline benefits that we can demonstrate. In my research, we were able to show that digitised content and the collection negotiations that were being done by JISC saved the UK higher education sector about £43 million a year. Okay.
What was that number, Simon?
£43 million per year.
Once again?
£43 million per year. And then you look at Glasgow Museum's collection, for instance. It's really interesting when you look at Glasgow Museum's collection. I mean, they've done an awful lot in terms of opening up access to those collections, opening their stacks, enable people to having an open collection strategy with their new buildings. But it's worth stating that the Glasgow Museum's collection is its biggest single physical asset. It's valued at £1.4 billion. That's a greater value in its cultural collection as a city than all of the private housing in the city. So it's a massive physical asset. It's around about 1.2 million objects. On average, about 2% of the collection is exhibited at any one time. Now, you can imagine that if you said to the population of Glasgow, you only get to live in 2% of the houses at any given one time, they wouldn't be very happy. So there's a real sense in which if we've got this huge physical asset, which is worth the same as all the houses in Glasgow, it should be in all the houses in Glasgow. Everyone should have access to this material. But they're going beyond that and saying, if we do this, we are seeking to increase the self-confidence in the population, to feel less marginalised, less insignificant, less unheard, to increase feelings of self-worth through interaction with museums, spill over into every aspect of their lives. This isn't, we will just give it to them, it will just be good. We want to actually go beyond that. We want to measure a change in the life and life opportunities of these people. Or let's look at this example from the National Museums Liverpool. In 2008, they did a full economic impact assessment where they looked at the actual economic impact. What return on investment are we getting in our environment? Now, the total budget of the National Museum of Liverpool is about £22 million per year. That's kind of what their running costs per year are on that line. Now, what they found was that during the Capital of Culture period, 25% of all visitors to Liverpool visited the Walker Art Gallery, 24% visited the Merseyside Maritime Museum, and 15% the World Museum. It's a grouping of museums that make up the National Museums in Liverpool. And about 5% of visitors only visited museums and didn't go anywhere else when they came into Liverpool. In total, National Museums Liverpool is reliably estimated to be worth £115 million to the economy every year. And that spend supports in the region of 2,274 jobs in the local economy, full-time jobs. And the report is available here, and you can see it, and you can look at it like this. So there's some real numbers that can be associated with museum activity. How much of this could we associate with digital activity, I do not know. But there are some numbers out there as well. And it's about the unexpected, the things that you think you're trying to do, and what you suddenly find in terms of audiences who jump out of the what's the word I'm looking for? Who sort of appear out of nowhere. So in the project I showed you earlier with the music in the hat box, that music's being used by primary school teachers in Canada for teaching music because it's free sheet music on the web. and you're kind of going, I can't quite get my head around how they found this resource in the first place and where they're sort of coming at it from in terms of using it, but I'm very pleased about that. That's an unintended consequence, and it's an unintended benefit. And also you get these issues around interdisciplinarity and collaboration. So the Freeze Frame Archive, which is a resource which is based upon and aimed at representing the historic records of the Arctic explorations, is actually also a really important resource for providing a baseline, a point at which you can measure from with regard to climate change and with regard to global warming. It's also, interestingly, the stuff they brought back from the Antarctic, things like the pelts of penguins, was used, again, as a baseline for measuring whether DDT was prevalent in the atmosphere. So they could go to the Antarctic, find a poor penguin, and say, okay, we're going to test whether you have DDT in you, in a rather aggressive way, so it has to be said. And then they could test whether the penguin skins that were brought back from these explorations also contained DDT, and demonstrate that DDT had been put into the environment, into the atmosphere, by human actions. It wasn't just a background thing that was in the environment, and that was an enormous opportunity. Now, I mention this because one of the things that's very important for us in thinking about impact is this issue of baselines. Where are we measuring from? So one of the things that we're going to need to be thinking about as we go forward is, can we say that, you know, if we've already provided someone with an image of an artwork on their desktop, can we keep going on about that being a benefit again and again and again and again and again, and saying, look, this benefit is there forever? Wouldn't that be a little bit like saying, well, we've given you email, and the benefits of email, we can keep restating the benefits of email for all time as being a benefit that we're giving you that is a massive, life-changing thing in your lives, like this. There has to be a point where you say, this is the baseline. This is the point at which we're going to measure from, change from. Because impact is about change, it's not just about benefit. And so we need to be measuring a point at which the change is happening from. And for different communities, that baseline is going to be different. It's not going to be the same here in the US as it is in South Africa, as it is in Singapore. And so we need to be thinking about, you know, these baselines. And these sorts of projects actually are interesting because they provide us with a baseline for global warming to a certain extent, a place which we can measure from. But also, when we're looking at measuring digital resources, we need to have a place to measure from as well. And that's one of the challenges that we are facing as we're going forward. So this sounds great, doesn't it? It sounds like we've got lots of benefits we can pile up, you know, stack them up and say, hey, aren't we doing a really good job? Lots of good things out there. There's a bit of a backlash. Nat Torkington gave a speech in Australia to provoke the national state librarians. And I think actually it's pertinent to this issue because, and it's kind of pertinent to the next debate that we're going to do after this about the Google Art project to a certain extent like this as well, you know. In that, how do we step up and compete in this environment when there's a lot of people out there looking at what we're doing and saying, with a slightly cynical, tongue-in-cheek way, you know, you want a massive digital collection, scan the stacks, you agonize over digital metadata and the purity thereof, and you offer crap access. So we've done all this work, and then, okay, your access is, yeah, it's okay. And if I ask you to talk about your collections, I know that you will glow as you describe the amazing treasures that you have, as I just have done, haven't I? And when you go for money for digitization projects, you will talk up the incredible cultural value. I think I've just done that too, haven't I? Like this. But if I look at the results of the digitization projects, I find the shittiest websites on the planet. It's like a gallery spent all its money buying art and then just stuck the paintings in supermarket bags and leant them against the wall. Now, I've been to the odd conceptual art gallery where actually that's what they've done, and that's fine. But the reality is that there's a sense that what we're doing isn't good enough. That.
Say that again.
Sorry.
No, I like it. Say it again.
There is
I think
a
it's an
sense.
important
He's asking
assertion.
you for an amen.
That's right. That's right.
There's a sense that what we're doing isn't good enough, and we can talk about reasons for that. We can talk about the way that people search. So they search for people, events, time, and yet we tend to want to index everything on subjects like this. But people are wanting to search by where they live, and we've got it indexed by it's a wonderful vase. We can tell you everything about the vase, but we can't tell you anything about anything that relates to people, and how you can relate to it as an individual. So there's a sense of criticism out there around those sorts of issues. And for me, this is about how do we get the next tranche of money? How do we get a justification when we're competing in a space for people's attention and eyeballs? How do we get our next money? How do we do that thing that's sort of epitomized in the song The Wichita Lineman, of getting our publics to say something like, I want you more than need you, and I need you for all time. That wonderful line in The Wichita Lineman. How do we get them to say that to us? How do we make that sort of justification? It's about evidence-based. It's about increasing the demonstration that we are needed, that we are wanted, that it's about people being changed. Not about necessarily 20 million users, but what does it mean to those 20 million users? How do they engage? And with that in mind, I have been looking at the issue of impact. Now, what I did when I looked at the issue of impact was I engaged with the way that impact is considered in areas such as economic impact, environmental impact, health impact, social impact, and we sort of synthesized a lot of the thinking and got a lot of experts together in one room. We've done a number of workshops and said, what's the essence of impact, and how could we engage with that in our community, in the museum, the library, the GLAM community? How could I, as an academic, engage with this concept? And in essence, impact's about what has changed and how. And I've used this definition for impact, which is the measurable outcomes arising from the existence of a digital resource that demonstrate a change in the life or life opportunities of the community. And the website is here, or if you go to my Twitter account @SimonTanner, the blogspot will lead you to it as well. So there's lots of different ways to get at this information. And this is freely available. The report's freely available. And it's available on a very open license, which allows you to chop it up, reuse it, do what you like with it. All I expect is to be attributed. Just go for it, have fun.
Did you say it's free?
Yeah.
Every day?
Yeah.
For download?
For all time.
No registration?
Nope.
And it's online?
You're amazing.
Wow.
I kind of feel, because it's about 50,000 words and 120 pages, that I should be paying you to read it. So anyway.
I read it on the plane here. It was a wonderful read. Captivating.
Okay. He's weird. No, one of the main things is this makes me very happy. When Neil says something like that, when I get good feedback, because one of the concerns I have is that impact seems so big and so hard and so difficult, we can't do it, And one of the things that I worked very hard on when looking at this issue was, how do we engage with small and medium-sized museums and libraries? how do we make impact something they can at least think about, even if they can't necessarily implement it in everything that they want to do. They may not be able to do all the things they wish to do. So, so anyway, let's get you into my head, which may not be a fun place for you, but let's see how it goes. What is impact? Okay, well, it's very important that if we're thinking about impact being measurable change, that change could be internal or external. It doesn't always have to be that the only impact you're interested in is the impact that happens out there. Sometimes it could be that change is happening to you as an organisation, that benefits are happening internally. It can be positive or negative. One of the things that's hardest about putting in place a model or a framework for measuring impact is you have to be able to accept that at some point you may get a result that says, do you know what? You're making no change whatsoever to your community, or actually you're making it worse for them. And you have to be able to accept that those results may come out of the process. Otherwise, you're not measuring impact. What you're doing is you're doing a marketing exercise of gathering information to make it look like you're doing really good stuff, like this. And of course, at some point, it may well be that you think that, well, because I'm not making a significant difference, that's a bad thing. But it could be that that's just a way of thinking about it from a perspective consideration. So one of the partners we worked with was the British Council. The British Council works to sort of promote and expand British culture overseas. And one of the things that they measured was whether the teaching outcomes they achieved, one of the things they measured was whether the teaching outcomes they achieved with their electronic teaching resources was the same as the teaching outcomes that they were achieving within classroom teachers. So this sort of face-to-face type teaching as opposed to online teaching. And they came out with a result that said online teaching is no better and no worse than in-room teaching. And they went, okay, that seems to give the impression that we're having no effect by doing stuff electronically. But they went, but actually this is really good news because in-room teaching is really expensive. So what we actually are able to demonstrate is that the benefit here is not that suddenly we're demonstrating that online teaching is so much better for people, but we can demonstrate that we can reach a lot more people this way. We can reach 200,000 people this way rather than 15,000 people this way. And so that was an area where you look at what's changing for those people, and you think the external benefits of those people is not that great. They're having the they're having the same outcome, but the internal benefit is that you can benefit more of them like this, and so that's worth having. And I want to talk about this 4 stages here, and I want to talk you through this example here, which is about health. And I want to talk to you about an example which is to do with the porn collections at the Smithsonian.
Thank you for that.
So, okay, one of the things that's frustrating to me when I was doing that research, looking at the expenditure that we've made on digitization in the UK, was that most of the information that we had, sorry to the cameraman who's having to follow me around, is that we had information at this stage. So we'd done activity, we'd digitized stuff, we'd had outputs which was, look, we've got 100,000 items, woohoo! And then we had outcomes which was, hey, look, we've got lots of people using this. We had no idea at all whether it was making any difference to those people. So let's look at this from the perspective of impact from a health perspective, because it's a nice example here. So activity, health research being carried out, that is not impact. Output, research findings published in papers, that is not impact. Outcome, changing clinical practice, surely that's impact. We changed something, clinical practice changed. No, that's still not impact. The impact is when we've improved the health and well-being. That's when the impact happens. And this scale of activity here has been measured in the health research community as taking possibly, on average, 17 years to happen. And one of the issues that we have is that we can measure figures here and here relatively quickly, and so we go, hey, that's what we should measure. But this is hard to measure, it's hard to get at, and because it's hard to get at, we tend to ignore it. But actually, that's the bit where you get to say, wow, I want you more than need you, and I need you for all time. You know? And so, you know, this is where I'm trying to move us to, is thinking about how this impact is engaging with people. You know, when we look at a digital resource being used, what change is occurring? What wider set of opportunities are now available to that person or community, whether those are educational opportunities or economic opportunities, you know, getting a new job, taking a new educational journey along those ways. And you know, you could look at this in a sort of fun way. So for instance, the Smithsonian, as I said, has a fabulous porn collection like this. It has porn videos which are of great detail and explicitness for pandas. Panda porn is a huge part of the Smithsonian's collection, and Sarah Staudeman talks about panda porn, and we've had lots of fun talking about this together in terms of the collections there. And so you have the aspect there of, if the Smithsonian was not collecting recordings of pandas having sex like this, what would be different in the world? You know, and you can look at that from the perspective of, you know, pandas having sex, the issue there, which is we've recorded the activities of recording pandas having sex. The output of that is recordings of pandas having sex, and the fact that the Smithsonian keeps these recordings for a very long time, that they preserve them, that they look after them, they curate them, they take care of those video recordings. And the outcome is that because of those outputs, the outcome is that zoos and people who are interested in breeding pandas all over the world access these recordings and play them to pandas in the hope that it will kind of get them frisky. Like this. And this is the interesting bit, okay? So we could say that the impact is more pandas, that the pandas are not extinct, that keeping the panda porn helps to ensure that there are more pandas in the world. But actually that's just good for pandas. Where's the human bit? If we were actually looking at what is the impact of more pandas in the world, we'd have to look at a wider set of things, wouldn't we? We'd have to think about the political implications of pandas being used as diplomatic tools to sort of say we're friendly with other countries, you know, like this. Or we'd have to look at the well-being or the sense of education and wonder, and or the scientific outputs or the economic outputs that relate to this, because those are the things that relate to people at the end of the day, you know, like this, because impact is about people. So bringing it back to impact being about people. And why does this matter so much? Well, you know, we're in an attention economy. So I tend to talk about this as being important. Our ability to attend to information is a tsunami of data and information. The thing that's lacking in our environment is not information or content. The thing that's lacking in our environment is people's time. Time to attend, time to give you attention, is the one indivisible resource. They can't make more of it by being richer. They can make their time more pleasant, but they can't make more of it. And so we're competing for our community's energy, for our community's time, for our community's engagement, for their eyeballs on our products, on our resources.
Time.
Yes.
Say that again. Follow that again. The one indivisible resource is people's time.
Yeah.
You can't make more of it.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll have a question about that later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. And it's about, you know, this issue here. The last 15 years in the UK, we spent £100 million on digitalisation. We mustn't waste that investment. We need to show that benefit. And it's about curating both the past and the future. I mean, we're all in this sort of situation, aren't we, in museums, where on the one hand, we're being told, look, let's curate the past in terms of our collections that we've got. Let's worry about digitizing our collections. And there was that wonderful presentations over this week where people have talked about digitizing their collections and how much money that would cost and how much availability that would make for those collections. But we're being absolutely drowned with born digital material as well, aren't we? We're being donated so much born digital material that hasn't had a previous existence in that physical analog world. I think there was I might be slightly misquoting here, but let's go for it, and I'll get told off if I'm wrong. But I believe that the Imperial War Museum is now getting donated as much born digital material each year as they previously digitized in their Past Your Future project. So in terms of the material that's being, sort of produced, provided to them from the Ministry of Defence and from other sources, in terms of that sort of content. So there's an issue there, and so we're looking at a deeper, richer method. And so I'd like to thank the Arcadia Fund who gave me the funding to allow me to look at the balanced value impact model. And what I did in that was I looked across these different areas of impact, and I probably said enough about those, so I'll just move on. But impact doesn't just happen in education or economics. It can happen in terms of things like democratizing access and political engagement, or it's about equality and equity of access sometimes, but it can be about environmental and sustaining, or entertainment and participation as well. So there's a lot of different things there to think about. So introducing a new way of thinking about impact. What the balanced value impact model does is it provides an umbrella under which you can think about, it's a thought model, it's a logic model. It allows you to think about impact and structure your thinking about impact assessment into 5 straightforward stages, which obviously recurse and allows one to engage with these things. It allows you to consider the key things, which is, what do I want to assess when I engage with impact? Why am I doing an impact assessment? What will I do when I get the results? There's no point just doing this stuff. We need to know what we're going to do with the results at the other end. And thinking about those questions will help to allow one to set an idea of the value of doing the impact assessment, because some impact assessments can be very simple in terms of just putting in feedback loops, qualitative and quantitative measures, webometrics, those sorts of things like that. Other impact assessments are going to be very expensive in terms of time, resources, possibly external consultants, those sorts of activities like this. So you have to have a very good idea of the value. Why are we doing this? What are we going to use it for? What are we going to get out at the other end, like that? And so the sort of economic impact assessment that was done by the British Library, for instance, where they were able to demonstrate that for every £1 that was spent in the British Library, they were putting £3 back into the economy. That was a vital thing for them in preserving their funding model from the government. So, so it was worth them spending a lot of money on that. Because the return on that. And what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is just focus on context. So we've got 5 stages. Context, which is about knowing who you are, who your community is, what your digital resource is, and how you're going to engage with your impact assessment. And then you have a process of designing your impact assessment, implementing it, thinking about the outcomes and results of that, and then how you're going to review and respond to that within this impact model. I'm going to focus on context because, for me, this is the unique bit of the model. In many ways, if you're an impact or an evaluation expert, you'll read these bits and go, oh yeah, he's talking about indicators, and he's talking about data gathering techniques, and he's talking about assumptions and things like that. Yeah, I know about those. Yeah, these are familiar things. Context is where the action's really happening here in terms of the model. So in context, I wanted to produce 4 different things. So we look at the ecosystem of the digital resource. So you need to understand, if you're going to do impact assessment of digital resource, what ecosystem does it exist in? Is this digital resource only on people's desktops? Is it a web-based thing? Is it on their mobile phones? That will change how you do your measurements. That will change the communities you're engaging with. It will change the data gathering techniques that you can have. So you need to understand the ecosystem of the digital resource. And you need to understand the stakeholders. So you need to know who's out there who has a stake in this. And I use stakeholders here in a very specific aspect of the community who could be changed or affected by the existence of the digital resource. And it could be that they're changed and affected by the existence of the digital resource even if they don't use it. So we need to be aware of that. It's not just about measuring people who are clicking on your resort, on your site. You can actually be looking at people who value what you do even if they're not using it. And it's about perspective. So I've looked at it from these 4 perspectives: internal impact, innovation, economic and social impact. And have created this structure, which means that you need to look at these 4 perspectives. And the reason that I wanted to look at this is because everything I've read about impact says that perspective matters. So, you know, this funny little cartoon up here. All these cartoons and illustrations, by the way, were done by an artist friend of mine called Alice Maggs, and she's great, so and does wonderful things like this. The Jubilee holiday may have cost the nation millions, but my business boomed, you know. I had a wonderful conversation with an economic impact expert and said, you know, the British Library have been talking to me about the Codex Sinaiticus and how when they made that available, you know, one of the most valuable rare books in the world, they had 20 million hits in the first month or 2 and how wonderful that was, and it wasn't a wonderful impact, how brilliant it was, like this. And he kind of went, yeah, you know, I put my tongue in my cheek and say, well, economically, it wasn't great, though, was it? And I went, what do you mean? He said, well, look, those 20 million people were sat there clicking on an ancient manuscript. They weren't shopping. They weren't engaging in the improving of the gross domestic product of the UK. Actually, you could actually say that that was damaging the economic prospects of the UK, like this. So it's all about perspective. Because clearly, that isn't a reason for not doing it, you know. And clearly, there are impacts and benefits that could be measured in other dimensions, other vectors, that if one looked at it from this perspective, one could bring to the fore. But the assumption that just because people are looking at it, it must be good, is one that we need to sort of move away from and say, how is it good? So what sorts of internal benefits are happening? You know, how are we being changed as organisations? How are we being made maybe more effective or efficient as museums, you know, in terms of our engagement? The innovation impact. What are we able to do now that we weren't able to do previously? You know, this session's being videoed, some of the sessions are being streamed. We weren't doing that 10 years ago. You know, what are we able to innovate? And how is that changing things? How is that engaging in different ways and benefiting us? And then looking outside your organisation and saying, well, how is my community more wealthy in some way? How are they having their economic well-being improved? And are they, is there a way in which we can show that the community is being benefits, that the social engagement, whether that's community cohesion, or whether that's a sense of place, a sense of understanding, or a sense of citizenship is being enhanced. And so, within that, those perspectives, I then want to bring to the fore 5 values. So these are modes of cultural value. I'm using the word modes very specifically here because I'm not trying to say these are the only cultural values that can exist. You know, I'm saying these are the 5 that are most prevalent when we engage with digital resources. And this is based on classic museum culture thinking from Pomeranian and Bruno. Who looked at cultural value in these perspectives. So the utility value. So I'm glad this is here for me to use. It's about use. I've used it. I'm happy. I'm glad it's there. An existence prestige value. So I'm glad it's there even if I never personally use it. So when you looked at the Your Paintings activity in the UK, which is digitising all of the oil paintings in the UK, they did some market research and they asked, their focus groups, etc. And they said, do you think it's a really good idea for us to have all the oil paintings in the UK made available, freely available to you? And they had a sort of 65-70% response rate, which was like, yes, fantastic, we think that's really great, we think that's wonderful. How many of you will use it? About 3%. Like this. But that 65% were passionate that it happened. And they said, I may not be the one who uses it, but my kids will use it. It's also about prestige. It's about saying, hey, we have an enormous amount of fantastic artwork in the UK. I want it to be seen. I don't want it to be hidden in fire stations and different places, out of sight. I want it to be seen. It's about that activity as well. Anyone who's ever tried to close down a public library on the basis that not enough people are using it will find something the community jumps up and says, well, I may not be using it, but I care that it's there. The education value, what knowledge have we gained? What new understanding have we achieved through this? And the value of a sense of lifelong learning or education. The community value. So how does engaging with the digital resource build a community? Bring a community together, engage a community in a sense of place or a sense of understanding of themselves. An inheritance bequest value. So the passing on, what we've inherited. The fact that you've been collecting for hundreds of years potentially in your collections. That inheritance is valued by your communities. But it's also about what you bequeath onto future generations when you digitize your collections or when you engage with those collections in that different way. And I practically use these 5 values to say that for each of those 4 perspectives, you need to make some choices. You need to say which of these values are you going to investigate within your impact assessment. Because you can't investigate 4 perspectives and then 5 values for every one of those. You'd end up with too many lines of engagement. So the reason for these to exist is to make you focus on what matters to you and your community. So you need to prioritize. You need to choose, say, 1 or 2 of these for each of the perspectives. And they'll change according to the perspectives that you might be coming from. So for instance, if I was looking at, say, the economic impact perspective, and I'm a small community-based museum, it's likely that the values, and on the basis of working with people, that the values that they'll want to explore are going to be about community value and about inheritance bequest value. Whenever I talk to community museums, those are actually the things that have tended to come out top for them, like that. But if I was looking at it from the perspective of a higher education organisation, like King's, we're going to go, it's about utility and education. It's about it being used, and it's about educational values. And so we would, you can immediately see that the process of impact assessment that you're going to do is now rather different for those 2 organisations, those 2 resource types. And you've now got a focus. You now know why you're doing it and where you're going in those environments. Now, I've tested this out. So we tested this out in the midnight runs. This was one of the things we did in the midnight run, was we tested these values. And I've used this in consultancy with museums. So one of the best things you can do is if you've got a bunch of trustees who don't agree with each other, they come together and they say, well, I don't know what this museum's for, we're battling with each other over our digital strategy, make them rank these 5 values from 1 to 5. And you'll be amazed at how much that will help to contextualize your discussion so that they'll be able to say, look, these are the things we really agree on, and these are the things we really disagree on. Like this. And when I used this in a small museum, they were surprised when everyone in that museum, whether it was one of their trustees who was a stockbroker or whether it was a curator, put education value as either their number 1 or 2 items. But what was really interesting was that all the internal curator or curatorial staff put inheritance bequest value as either at 1 or 2. But none of the trustees who were from the outside world put that at their 1 or 2, they all put that at 4 or 5 on their list of priorities. And so we were able to, by using this, you're able to use it as, look, this is what we agree on, and this is what we don't agree on. And that helps you to find your way and think about these issues. So the idea is that if you're clear about perspectives and values, you chuck that into the balanced value impact model, it will enable you also to report what you're doing more easily, because your end report, your business case, the thing where you say, look, here's the impact we're making, is going to come out with a report that says, look, we make our community more wealthy. We make our community happier or healthier in some way in terms of their sense of community. We are a better organisation because of our internal abilities to do this. And you know what? We're also doing cool new stuff that we never would have done previously. Don't know why that's gone off. There we go. And so the 4 perspectives are there, both to guide you through the process, but also to give you a nice package thing at the end where you can say, look, if I argue on these 4 dimensions rather than just saying, are we economically good or have we got lots of users, I'm going to have a much better argument to an external funding body, to internal funding opportunities, to governments, to etc. like this. And so that's the reason that we have those there, to package at both ends. So just to finish, what I'd like to do is talk. Let's have a good old think there, isn't it? A little talk about the midnight runs. So as I said, we did 2 midnight runs. The first one you saw earlier on, which was where we gathered strangers. We just said, come all, like this. And most of those people were under 30 because they were going to spend 12 hours walking across London. They were going to play games and engage in different activities. And what we did was we took those 5 values, we turned each of those values into either a game or an experiment that could be done with individuals, and we tested those people through the night. So the education value, we took them into King's. We took them up into our Anatomy Theatre Museum, which is an old space where you can actually write on the walls, and there's lots of multimedia things. We asked them about education, and they wrote poems and ideas about their educational experiences. We took them into a space near Trafalgar Square, and we got them to do voting by running into different corners on things about the prestige existence values. We asked them to say what had they inherited in their lives and what were they bequesting forward in their lives. And we got them to draw the skyline from a utility perspective or buildings that they've done. But the best one for me was the community one. At the end of the night, we sat down as the sun was rising over the Thames, and I gave everyone a piece of paper and I said, draw a line. The line is your journey that you've taken over the last 12 hours. It can be any sort of shaped line you want. Mark 2 things on the line. The moment when you joined the tribe. When did you become a member of the community? And your favourite thing. And what was really interesting was that 80% of people marked the same moment as the moment when they joined the tribe. And that was when we played bag ball. Okay. And bag ball is this game that was played about 2.5 hours into the midnight run. We'd already gone to the fairground, we'd already done various sort of flash mob things like everyone freeze for a minute, you know, in a big crowd of people, you know, that sort of thing like this. You know, we'd done fun things. We'd lied to each other. We tried lying to each other really hard, you know, so you could guess who was lying and not lying about their past, you know, these things like this. And so we were already quite grown together. But bag ball is, we found a green space, an open green space, but it said no ball games. So we took my friend Inua's, we took his rucksack and we filled it with jumpers and coats, and we threw that around in a structured game, which we called bag ball, which was a combination of different games. And we played that for about 20-25 minutes, and we got sweaty, we got hot, and we played as teams, and we had fun, and we laughed, we fell over, and we had a good time like that. And what was interesting was that Inua did not know. He's been doing these midnight runs since 2005. He's been doing bag ball for like the last 3-4 years, you know, because it just came out of this idea of what can we do in this space. He didn't know that that was the moment when everyone became a member of the tribe. But we found this out through this experimentation, etc. But we then said, look, what we're doing here is we're trying to reappropriate buildings and spaces in the middle of the night for us to use, to put back into community use in areas that they're not usually done. One of the things that's often done on a midnight run is they'll take bulbs, plant bulbs, and plant them in roundabouts and things like this, you know, so that over a few months later there'll be daffodils and tulips and things like this coming up, you know, those sorts of things like that, you know, reappropriating public spaces, you know, in those areas. And we thought, could we do this for the elders from the Enteleki Arts? You know, could we bring the elders into that space and do a midnight run? Well, they're not going to make it over 12 hours of walking like this. So we came up with the concept of midnight stroll, should we say. And we engaged in a 4-hour process. And so I'm running awfully over long with this. So, and I'm just going to skip this. I'll put it online. And what we did was we got these, in the end it was 4 80-year-old plus ladies together for us to work with, and we took them to 2 locations, the South Bank Centre, where we did all sorts of exercises and fun things, and we brought them into King's in the middle of the night, and we went through the King's Chapel, where we actually have a church on the 2nd floor inside the King's building, and someone was practicing the organ, and we went in there and we did all sorts of interesting things with them, and we got very interestingly different results from them in terms of how they responded to those five values. And so there's an interesting area here, but what they got most out of it was the idea. They said, we'd like going into these places when everyone else has gone. We'd like going into these places in the middle of the night. We'd like the sense that we are now taking these places back into our possession. So one of the things that we want to do is actually extend this so that next time we'll take these older people into the British Museum at the middle of the night, and we'll take them to different places. So any museums out there who want to engage with us on this sort of thing, we want to do more of this. So I'll show you the video. reason I wanted to bring the Midnight Run into this conversation is that all of this is about people. It's all about bringing everything we're doing back to people and about those engagements, and that I've been trying to look at this impact perspective from a very, very big, high-level impact perspective, but actually at the other end of it, we've been also trying to bring it back into a very practical engagement with individuals and thinking about that issue around people. So I just want to sort of leave these thoughts. We had great feedback, someone who said that they'd never thought about these things for the last 10 years. Just allowed myself to be, and I felt enriched. I feel energized by that and empowered by that. But just one last thought then for you to consider on value, maybe as a provocation at the end. In our environment where we're trying to juggle all of these different issues, is whether the value is in the wine, the glass, or the drinking. Thank you very much. So over to you guys.
Good, sir.
Well, let's assess. There are 20 minutes left.
That's a good idea, yeah.
Neil can add value to anything. I don't feel like I can add any value to that.
Okay.
There are probably a lot of questions. I can hold forth about, I can filibuster for 10 seconds while you all think of questions.
I had some questions for you, Simon. One of the things that I was reflecting on with the whole process of the documentation, your presentation, is that I think you provide layers of engagement for thinking about strategy in museums, digital in particular, that this study could be used in a team setting, it could be used for an overarching digital strategy, and it could be used in terms of a board context like you were talking about earlier. And what I felt was most resonant about your presentation in the report was this focus on the human, which is something I think we both really share a common interest in, and that we can tackle these larger institutional challenges in that way. My first question for you is, do you think your work in the digital humanities as a mode of creativity, as a mode of interdisciplinary thinking, gives you the toolkit to understand and bring all these things together? That is a really core way of you're attacking these problems.
I think it gave me a home which enabled me to do that. I think I was already there.
Right.
I think that one of the things that you see with people who generally are attracted to the digital humanities is that they're thinking in this cross-disciplinary way. Mm-hmm. They're not coming at the, you know how often you have that sort of conversation between museum librarians and archivists, and it's a bit like a conversation between a doctor, a surgeon, and a nurse. Who's more important? Like this. Well, we're cool because we're doctors, or we're cool because we're dentists, or we're cool because we're surgeons. Sort of thing like this. And the reality is we're all cool, and we've all got interesting things to offer to each other. And there's some things that museums do better than libraries, and some things libraries do better than museums. And there's contextual stuff that archives do that the rest of the world is only just catching on to, in that sense, like this. So I think the interdisciplinary thing, which is a core feature of the digital humanities, is something where it was a comfortable home for me. Mm-hmm. In that sense. Some of the things that I'm doing are a little bit uncomfortable, like the Midnight Run is a new thing that mm-hmm. a lot of my colleagues are looking at and going, hey, that's kind of interesting, where do we fit with that, and it feels a bit ethnographic, it feels a bit social studies for some mm-hmm. of my humanities colleagues, but, it's still part of the round. Right. But the key thing is for me, is I have a sense that a lot of decision making in museums is organic and what I would call accidental management. Where it isn't purposeful enough. Right. And all I really want to do in all the work that I've been engaging with is give people tools to be purposeful about how you manage things, be purposeful about how you make decisions. Because if you're purposeful about it, you can then change it if it goes wrong. You can review it, you can engage with it. Whereas if it's happening in that sort of, we're kind of here because we've always done it that way, mm-hmm. it's very difficult to then change it because no one owns it. And that makes it difficult. So this is just another layer of purposeful management, really.
The value system that I'm most interested in whenever I'm looking at these research questions is the social value. And I think that's oftentimes the hardest for people to grasp.
Yeah.
And I think the example of the midnight run, or even using the impact models and different types of education programming or activities that museums are already doing, will help them better prepare to demonstrate that social value. Why do you think that is? That's something that's so hard to maybe show on paper or in stats or in a presentation, but it's something that we feel instinctively, we feel in response to people, we feel in a project like the Midnight Run or in an education program or a lecture or gallery talk, we feel as museum workers these visceral human impacts that is the social good. And how do we demonstrate that better using these models?
And there's an awful lot of methods out there for doing that, and I felt that in a sense when I was looking at the sort of impact modelling that had been done within our community, it was very economically driven, and that even the social impact assessment stuff had an economic driver behind it, and I didn't want us to fall into this. It has to be qualitative, it has to be quantitative argument. Why can't we do both? Why can't we mix and match for the appropriate measures for the appropriate things we want to measure? And in terms of the social impact, there's some really interesting community-driven impact methodologies, such as theory of change. There's the triple task method, which has been promoted by Simon Bell, and really puts the community at the center of the assessment activity and allows the community to drive what is assessed. Now that comes with some uncomfortable things alongside it. If you allow your community to define what success is, are you going to change if they tell you they want you to change? And how do you move away from maybe a sort of patriarchal concept of what the museum is, particularly in a digital space of us broadcasting and actually having a conversation, and can you cope with that there being a conversation? And so those do raise some fairly significant ideas. As we've seen through things like crowdsourcing, where suddenly you have a community out there who's say, well, yeah, I've just come in and I played this crowdsourcing game, but now I feel like I own stuff, and I want to have a say in that, and how do you engage and respond to those issues? So I think the context setting stage is something that you could do even if you weren't touching the impact side of things, because it would help to focus why you're there and what you're trying to achieve with your digital resources, and would provide a very interesting report internally to say this is what we're trying to do. But if one's engaging with the impact, you really need to know those things, because it could be uncomfortable what you get back as responses, either in terms of, hey, you're doing an amazing job, but maybe not the job you thought you were doing, or they're not so happy. So how are you going to work with that, and how are you going to respond? The response stage is as important as the measurement stage. It isn't something where you just go, hey, we've done the measurement, we can just stop now. And you've got to keep measuring. My last comment observation is just thinking about the model is that I'm prepared now to think about this every day I sit down at my desk, that this recontextualizes and reimagines the everyday in terms of the human context of my role in the museum, that the people that I'm thinking about even more are the people walking through the galleries, connecting to our collections online. And I think this report does that in a way that's unique because of your vision, your ideas, but it sets up a framework that when we approach digital asset management, 3D printing, hacking, making, we have this human context, but it's applied through this systematized process of modeling. And what's the next step for this? What's the next step for making this felt and resonant in practice? Yeah, I mean, when I went through the process of building this, we did significant peer review with the National Library of Wales and with the National Museums Northern Ireland, and we hope to actually be able to present some significant case studies where we said, look, here's how they produced the model. But actually the model wasn't working when we went to do the peer review, and they helped us get it right. They helped me. There was a point at which I'd got one bit of the model in the wrong place, and they were able to show me, look, if you just move it here, your life will be so much easier. And I argued with them for a while, saying, no, you just don't get it. How can you be so silly? And then realized that they were absolutely right. And so there's a really important role here for peer review, and there's a really important role here for the next stages, which is we're planning to roll this out. I've got 3 or 4 organizations which are wanting to apply the model now over the next few months. I'm leading the Europeana task force on impact over the next 6 months or so to look at frameworks for Europeana type impact measurements. And, you know, it's like any plan, take it into battle and see what happens. And I expect there to be a version 2 and a version 3 and a version 4 as we get better, as we learn more, as it gets tested out there in the field and people come up with it. You know, for instance, the 5 values, you can come up with a different set of values if you want to. I think these are the ones that will work for you. You know, if you look in the report and read about it, I think they'll work for you. But it would be completely fine to say, look, I want to drop one of these values and just put entertainment as one of my values. That would be fine, you know. There's a structure there to help you think about these issues, but it doesn't have to be, you don't only have to do it the way Simon says. I want people to reflect back and say, well, we tried it, and yeah, it works great like this, but actually we'd like to do it like that as well. So there's an element here of testing that we need to go through the next stages.
I think you should take questions.
I think I should, yeah. Go on, at the back there.
You said that the bagball game during the Midnight Run was the most transformative experience. You said it was the moment at which the group became a tribe. Why do you think that is, that game, more than any of the other things that you did?
I don't know whether it was the most transformational moment, but it was the moment which most people identified as being the point where they felt they were a full member of the community, where they'd sort of, if you like, you know, become a member of the tribe, as it were. And I think it's in the nature of playing games. I think up until that point, we'd all been doing stuff together. We'd visited a museum on Brazilian culture. We'd been up into the anatomy theatre and done the education stuff, the exercises. We'd gone to a fairground. We'd done all sorts of interesting and fun things. But in a sense, you could still do those as groups of 2 or 3. And Bagball required everyone to do something together all at once at the same time. And it built onto that issue of team sports, which make you feel tribal anyway, and those sorts of areas like this. It would be easy to overstate it as an effect, and to say, oh, this tells us something universal about the whole world. It could be that it tells us about those people on that night, because it wasn't raining, for instance, because if it had been raining, would we really have wanted to be running around in the dirt, you know, like this? But it was a very interesting thing that when we actually asked the question, this is maybe the key thing for me was, Inua had never asked that question. And suddenly we got a new insight, a new perspective by asking the question. And for me, a lot of the things that I'm concerned about with impact in general is that we haven't even been asking the question. So if you were, I gave a talk about this at Digital Humanities Congress, which was full of academics, and I asked the question, how many of you have asked your students why they came on your course? And almost no one had done that. And they didn't know which digital resources that they'd been working with. This is digital humanities. They didn't know which digital resources they'd been working with had helped students make a choice for coming to them. And that wasn't that the information's not out there, it's just that no one had thought to ask the question. And I think a lot of this is just about, let's think about asking questions. And let's ask those questions over a long enough period of time that they're significant as well. Rather than only asking them over a 3-month period at the end of the project, we're all sweating to try and get the thing finished. You know, so those sorts of issues. Okay, at the back there.
Could you talk to the applicability of this to developing museums?
Yeah, because one of the things that you can do is you can use impact assessment in a predictive mode. So if you think about that activity, output, outcome, impact idea, one of the things that you can do is you can say, right, if I plan my activity, what would be the expected outputs of that activity? if those outputs happened, what would be my expected outcomes from that activity? And if those outcomes happened, how would I turn those into impact? And you can use that, so you can start from the perspective of saying, how can I design my activity so that it will achieve a specified impact? You don't have to always start from the perspective of what have we done and how good is this? You can actually build it in as part of your planning process in terms of how you might measure things or how you might engage with things. So one of the examples with the National Library of Wales is they're about to launch their newspaper archive with about several million pages of Welsh newspaper. And one of the things we said was, look, if we were looking at the economic perspective, how would we measure that? And they said, well, look, we can actually measure the last 20 years, all the people who've come to the library, which is in a remote part of Scotland, of Wales. It would be slightly weird if it was in Scotland. In a fairly remote part of Wales, about 60 miles to the nearest major town outside of Aberystwyth. And we've got user records for the last 20 years of people who've travelled to the library to look at newspapers. So we can actually work out how much it's cost them to travel to the library to look at newspapers for the last 20 years. And let's say there were, 250,000 people over the last 20 years who've come and looked at the library, and we can work out a cost per mile for those people on average to come to the library to look at newspapers. And let's say we're suddenly having 250,000 people a month looking at the newspapers online, and we can show that for that community we are saving them that travel cost. And so therefore we are benefiting that community. Now, car manufacturers, railway companies, garages, sweet shop sellers, restaurants, they're all losing because people aren't traveling like this. But, so impact is never just one person, like this. But we can say for that community, in that circumstance, we are economically benefiting them in this way. And you can actually then start designing your way of engaging and gathering data to help you to think about that sort of impact along the way. Okay. Well, okay, one more question and then we'll...
It's about the quote that you started with. If I heard it right, there's something said in nostalgia about relying on the shards of glass and not being able to see the sky.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yeah. So the motto of the Midnight Run is that because we can't see the stars for fumes, we turn to smashed glass, believe in the shards shine like constellations do. And so the idea is that we're re-visualizing our city by going and walking around it, by sitting in a subway at 3 a.m. in the morning and having Hindu hymns sung to us. There's an element of reclamation, of bringing those constellations down to the ground and us engaging with them, rather than always assuming that the only way we can get value from this space is by leaving it and going somewhere else. We can reclaim it. We can have our own engagement with it. That's slightly different. Okay, I think unless there's any really burning last questions, I think we should end there. And thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you,
And can I thank these two guys who have been really supportive this week, have been fantastic and helped me to put together the presentation as well for this. So thanks, you guys.